Hey everyone, Mitch Cuell here from Outlook Ag in Narrabri. Here to talk about Feathertop Rhodes grass and our strategies, key strategies for managing this weed in our farming system. We've adopted a bit of a saying or an approach to hit it early and hit it often, and we've got 4 or 5 key options that help us manage this weed throughout our rotation. One being strategic knockdowns, camera spraying, double knocking residuals, and also using our rotation to get on top of the weeds. The main aim to reduce seed set. So we conducted a trial in 2020. At the end of the drought, we had a blowout of Feathertop in a paddock west of Edgeroi, and we thought we could take a different approach on how to manage that blowout. At the time, we didn't have an optical sprayer available for that paddock, so we thought let's try something different here and use what technology we had available to try and take a targeted approach onto that Feathertop population. So we used some NDVI imagery, which worked really well because out of the drought, the paddock was all bare soil and all we had come up was Feathertop Rhodes and some barnyard. So we were able to really work out whereabouts and what percentage of that weed had blown out in that paddock. So from there, we created a variable rate map, being able to hit the weed a lot harder where it had blown out, and also take a second knock approach with some residuals in the same aspect. The blowout was about 30% of the paddock, and yeah, we got some really good results at the three different rates. So in a low rate on the area that had hardly any grass, and then a medium rate and the top label rate on the bigger areas. And then 5 days later, we came back with our paraquat at a similar aspect. So we variable rated that as well. So we went the lower rate on the lower areas and a higher rate on the bigger areas. We also, in that paraquat knock, we had our residual of balance and dual gold, where we once again varied that rate to the top label rate on the high end. And from that approach, we got really good control residually and knockdown of that plant, and we didn't see much of a blowout through the rest of the season. We also used the optical sprayer as a contractor after that to get on top of any escapes. So with the variable rate map, we were able to put that into our case sprayer with the pulse width modulation with the single nozzle control, and that's how we're able to variable rate those different chemicals across the paddock. So from there, after we've done our residuals and our paraquat on this paddock, we managed the fallow up until we planted chickpeas, which turns out our residual and knockdown worked reasonably well. We were just able to get away with 2 camera sprays, targeting any escapes in this paddock, mainly with paraquat in the camera. You can see on the photo we've got on the screen what it would look like if we hadn't done our double knock. So you can see where there's a clear line that we left aside for some extra trial sites, some double knock residual trial sites. So you can just see there how imperative our double knock is in the system going forward. So our trial site went into chickpeas in 2020, which we topped up the balance obviously into the chickpeas. And following that crop through and following the management of our Feathertop through that summer, we were quite impressed at the reduction in seed bank we had from the first VR knock and residuals we did the previous year. So I think we went from about a 30 to 40% blowout down to a 2 to 5% blowout. So over that summer after the chickpeas, we were able to manage that Feathertop through a camera sprayer quite economically. And then went into a following wheat crop. We were quite happy and surprised at the accuracy of the residuals it gave us on our seed bank. Our residuals have worked so well over these summers because we've had such a forgiving season, you know, a lot of rain to incorporate that that herbicide down to that seed layer to really eradicate the plant. The last 2 to 3 summers we've been lucky enough for those residuals to work, and certainly some mixes better than others. So our balance dual gold turbine mixes really coming up with the goods on the Feathertop, not only at this site but all around the district. And where we haven't used residuals, you can really tell, and those fallows are definitely getting harder and harder to manage with just your single knockdown, double knocks without those residuals. So what did we learn from our trial? I guess, where do we put that commercially? We took that residuals are absolutely key, one, and a really good knockdown with a double knock, those residuals. That's what we took out of our trial and what we moved into practice across a lot of our other paddocks in the following summers, and we saw some really great results with that, and being a key aspect of the management of Feathertop. So with those residuals down and with your knockdown done after harvest, the camera sprayer then becomes imperative in controlling the escapes and reducing your seed set. So the main aim now for where we've used residuals the following season would just be keep camera spraying until we reduce that seed set down to nothing. Yeah, so where we see our optical sprayers fit all depends on the season. So say we come out of a drier harvest where we haven't got a lot of weeds present, or a lot of volunteer pulse or cereal crops present, that's when our optical sprayers will come in handy to do our strategic knockdown, and then we'll come back with our paraquat and our residuals there. And in the wetter years where we've got a wet harvest and we've got a lot of volunteer cereals and pulses where we need a broad acre, that's our camera may come back after the residuals done to get the escapes. So over these past couple of summers, we've been dealt a few scenarios with Feathertop. With the wet harvest, we had established Feathertop plants underneath the header, so straight away we were behind the 8 ball with those plants, and the management of that paddock, we were unsure of the rotation of what we were going into, so residuals weren't really an option on this farm. So we had to keep persisting with the knockdown double knock strategy with the Group A. But in my mind, that's just a band-aid, and a very weak band-aid approach. So now knowing that paddock in the next couple of years, we're going to have to use a few years of strategic residuals, camera sprays to overcome that blowout. And we're at the point in this particular paddock where we now had to use strategic tillage to manage it, which is where we didn't want to be, because we're in a no-till system, where we rely much heavily on our cover to store the moisture and grow the next crop. So they're the sort of downsides of Feathertop blowout, when you have to bring the steel in, so to speak, and use a band-aid approach, but you're just burying that seed. So moving forward, this farm will have a bit of a 3-year plan to manage that weed through residuals and camera spraying. Another issue which we ran into this summer was where the residuals didn't get put out correctly, so they went in with the knockdown herbicide on mature plants, and we found that wasn't a great option, because you had a half dead weed through the season, which then became really hard to manage and control with systemic herbicides, because the plant was weak, and all we had was paraquat out of a camera to keep burning that down to kill that plant, which is almost impossible when they're fully seeded, and very hard to get down to that growing tip to kill it. Yeah, so with that paddock, if we were to till that paddock, probably may have been a better option at the time, but once again we're in a very marginal moisture in these paddocks, which we didn't want to disturb the system and get rid of that moisture for potential planting of the crop, which that was a bit further west in a more marginal area. So moving seed around the paddock with the use of tillage and plant equipment you tend to see it quite a bit. You take maybe what's spread on the edge of a paddock, you go and farm your whole paddock, you generally see the next summer quite a large blowout in that paddock as the seed just runs like water through those paddocks. So I guess that's the other downside to the tillage, is you're spreading it, and it's a weak band-aid approach to something you're going to have to manage later on in the system. So expanding on our residual programs, what are we using, what works, what rates? Starting probably with our more robust chemical would be Balance in the fallow. We tend to mix a lot of our residuals with different groups. We find that mixing Balance with a group C, such as turbine, you tend to get that synergy between the two groups, increasing that we find your efficacy by 10 to 15%. The other mix, which is standalone or with the Balance and the group C brew, would be Dual Gold. Now we find that Dual Gold alone on FTR probably needs to be at that 2 litre rate to get the robust control out of the product. When we're mixing it with the Balance or the group C, we find that the litre rate is enough to get us over the line. And it's an expensive brew, but we find that the Dual Gold group C Balance is a very robust mix, not only on our FTR but on our other problem weeds such as fleabane and sow thistle, which really that's when we're managing fallows with 2 to 3% camera sprays. Some of our other residual products we've talked about and trialled around the place is Valor. Valor we haven't used a lot of. We're just a little bit worried with the stubble type and the solubility of Valor in the program, but also it has a robust package on broadleaves as well as the grass. Flame is the other one. Flame is one I personally stay clear of, as we use a lot of IMIs in our system already, growing canola and faba beans. So we don't want to bioaccumulate that product too much in our system. So when we grow crops like our cotton, we're not seeing those plant back effects come through. And I guess with these residuals that we're using, each and every one of them have a different plant back scenario to what crop you're planting. So yeah, a lot of thought and time has to go into the decision before you put that residual on your paddock, and knowing what you're locked out of. Dual Gold we find is probably one of the safest ones rotationally, and then you've got limitations obviously on your Balance and your group C's, and that's where, or like I stated before, with the Flame and the IMI group, that's we stay clear of that, because the residual effects are quite harmful on a lot of our crops. So our blowouts typically throughout our rotation, we find it coming out of our pulse crops, so out of our chickpeas or faba beans, we tend to see more of a blowout due to less competition and shading in that early spring germination. So where our faba beans or our chickpeas have senesced, those grass weeds have come through, and that's where we find our blowouts tend to occur. And where we have to get our management strategies onto those paddocks quicker than say out of a cereal, where we find that the grass or the FTR is probably a little bit slower coming out, and also a lot to do with the paddock history. So where you had your blowout the year before, you sort of know where to come back to and manage that blowout. And leading into crop sequencing, that's what I talked about in the introduction. We use our crop sequencing to try and combat the issue. So our rotation, we find that probably an observation that we've noticed coming out of a cereal, where we've got a heavy stubble load or a stripper front that has harvested the cereal crop, we found that the shading in the fallow has probably added a bit of extra competition to that Feathertop Rhodes grass. And then also in situations in cereals where we've used a pre-emergent up front for ryegrass or phalaris control, so our Secura, that we tend to see a little bit of residual come through there, or a delay in the germination of our Feathertop. So putting all that together and Using it as a management strategy is key. And then, going into our sorghum or our summer cotton rotation, that's a different aspect onto it as well. So we like to manage our fallows into our summer crops a bit differently. We like to put our residual straight behind the winter crop, which gets a 18-month fallow through to the summer. So we put our top up a residual in the summer to get us through to that spring germination, where we top up our residuals again, and then we plant our sorghum or our cotton, where we have the option to top up in crop as well. So we like to plan our sequence into our summer crop, particularly in sorghum, where obviously in crop you cannot manage a blowout of feathertop. So having that residual lead up to sorghum is critical. And in recent years we've also added to that by growing narrow space sorghum, where we find that the competition from that acts as a natural double knock on top of the upfront residuals on managing potential blowouts in feathertop. And not only is that a bonus, we're also seeing quite good yield differences in the narrow row spacing and increasing our cover in the system. Another aspect with our summer cropping and a potential worry that I have is our in-crop options for our pulse and our cotton. We're heavily reliant on the Group A there, which we're probably only a few years away from losing that product on the feathertop. So find it imperative to get that residual chemistry on the start of that fallow going into summer, and topping up in sequences on the way through, so we're not putting so much pressure on that Group A in those pulse or cotton crops, particularly in the pulse crops where your competition is a lot less and your blowouts are going to be a lot worse if you haven't done your dual gold or your residual up front to try and combat that. So one of the biggest risks we take using residuals in our fallow are obviously the plant backs. So knowing those plant backs is absolutely imperative with those chemicals, and knowing what the time lengths are to those crops, the rainfall and what you get. We take a bit of a risk when we put that residual on, that we don't get that rain to break down that herbicide so you can plant your subsequent crop. So having plan A, plan B, plan C is imperative when using residuals, and knowing what those residuals do. So knowing the solubilities, the makeup, and how they act in the soil, we find is pretty critical in determining your crop sequence. So with our summer sequencing into our cotton, we've only got the Group A option. So moving forward, some technology that will be available to us in the coming years is the extend from Bayer in the cotton. So giving the option of glufosinate in crop. So that's where we could really stretch the longevity of the Group A. So we're putting a Roundup Group A on our feathertop in crop, coming back 7 days later with the glufosinate to try and double knock in crop. I think will be imperative to reduce the seed set and the longevity of using Group A chemistry in crop. So the option now to use dual gold to top up in crop is also helping in these wet years. So where we can top up early on just to extend that longevity of dual gold through the season and take the pressure off our other knockdown products. So most growers own a chipping hoe, and that's probably one of the better eradications is chip it out, put it in a bag, and burn it and get rid of it nowhere near your field, and you can't take away from that. That'll always work. So wrapping up our strategy of hit it early, hit it often, hitting it early when it's nice and young, getting that good knockdown, followed by a double knock to kill that weed, followed by a residual plan throughout your rotation is imperative, and I think needed going forward to get on top of this weed and manage it in our system, which can be done. It's that little bit extra money, but that's something we have to swallow now, and we've become so reliant on glyphosate in our system, and we're seeing it break down quite rapidly in front of us on many weeds, and you know, this is a way, not only Feathertop but a lot of other weeds in our system that we're going to have to start managing in this way.